From the outside, Kim Yoo-jung's smile never changed. At events, she bowed politely, laughed at the right moments, and answered questions with the same calm warmth fans had known for years. Cameras captured her dimples, her steady gaze, the familiar grace that made it easy to believe everything was exactly as it seemed. But behind that smile, a clock was always ticking. 100 days. That was the number they never said out loud, but both of them knew by heart. 100 days of careful distance. 100 days of choosing silence over honesty. 100 days of pretending that nothing had shifted when everything had. It didn't begin with deception. It began with caution. Kim Yoo-jung had learned early in her career that timing mattered more than feelings. She had grown up in front of the public, watched narratives form overnight, and seen how quickly stories could turn into cages. So when something real began to take shape, something quiet, unplanned, and undeniably human, her first instinct wasn't excitement. It was protection. The decision was never dramatic. No argument. No ultimatums. Just a shared understanding reached in a quiet moment, away from schedules and scripts. Whatever this was, it couldn't be named yet. Not publicly. Not safely. So they agreed to wait. And Kim Yoo-jung, more than anyone, committed to that waiting with a discipline few people ever noticed. Every appearance became an exercise in restraint. She learned how to stand just far enough away, how to let conversations end first, how to keep her expressions neutral even when familiarity tugged at her instincts. Fans praised her professionalism, unaware that every composed moment carried weight. There were days she questioned herself, not the decision, but the cost, because the lie wasn't loud. It wasn't scandalous. It was subtle, and that made it heavier. It lived in small moments, a glance she didn't return, a message she didn't send, a laugh she softened so it wouldn't linger too long. The hardest lies aren't the ones you tell others. They're the ones you tell yourself. She told herself this was temporary, that 100 days would pass quickly, that clarity would come at the end of it. But time doesn't always move the way we expect. As the days went on, the public saw nothing unusual. Work continued. Interviews were conducted. Projects moved forward. Kim Yoo-jung remained exactly who she had always been, reliable, talented, unshaken. What they didn't see was how carefully she managed her inner world. She avoided places that felt too familiar. She stopped rewatching old clips that reminded her how easy things once felt. She filled her schedule not to stay busy, but to stay steady, because stillness made the truth louder. Around day 30, fans began noticing something they couldn't quite explain. Her smile was still there, but it lingered differently. Softer, quieter, as if it carried something unsaid. Comment sections filled with speculation, but Northwest one came close to the truth. Because the truth wasn't dramatic enough for headlines. It was patience. And patience, when mixed with emotion, can feel like its own kind of ache. By day 50, the agreement had become harder to ignore. Not because it was failing, but because it was working too well. Distance had done what it always does. It clarified things. And clarity can be terrifying when you're not ready to act on it. Kim Yoo-jung understood something then that she hadn't before. The lie wasn't protecting her from the world. It was protecting the world from her truth, from the consequences of revealing something unfinished, something still growing. And so she kept smiling. At a midpoint event, cameras caught a moment that fans replayed endlessly. A brief pause, a look that lasted half a second too long before she looked away. Analysts called it coincidence. Editors called it clever framing. Kim Yoo-jung called it a mistake. That night, she didn't sleep easily. Not because she feared exposure, but because she realized how thin the line had become between control and surrender. 100 days suddenly felt longer than it ever had. Still, she didn't break. Because for Kim Yoo-jung, integrity had always mattered more than impulse. She had spent her life proving she could grow without losing herself. This was no different, even if it meant carrying the weight alone. As day 70 approached, the industry buzzed with unrelated rumors. New pairings, new scandals, new distractions, and in that noise, her silence remained intact. No confirmations, no denials, just consistency. People mistook that for emotional distance. It wasn't. It was emotional discipline. There were moments, quiet, private moments when the life felt unbearable, when she wondered if waiting was just another way of being afraid. But each time doubt surfaced, she reminded herself why the agreement existed in the first place. Some stories don't survive being told too early. By day 85, the end was finally visible. Not close enough to touch, but close enough to feel real. Kim Yoo-jung began to sense a shift, not externally, but within herself. The waiting had changed her, strengthened her, clarified what she was willing to risk and what she wasn't. The smile she wore now wasn't just a mask. It was resolve. And when the 100th day arrived, there was no celebration, no dramatic confession, no sudden change in behavior, just a quiet acknowledgement that something had ended and something else was about to begin. The lie had done its job. What came next would require something different. Honesty, but only when the time was right. Because behind Kim Yoo-jung's smile was never deception, only a truth waiting for its moment to breathe. After the 100th day passed, nothing changed on the surface, and that was what unsettled people the most. Fans had expected a shift, a sign, a slip, some visible reward for the patience they didn't even know they were practicing. But Kim Yoo-jung stepped into day 101 exactly the same way she had stepped into day 1. Calm, composed, smiling. Yet internally, the rules were no longer the same. The agreement had ended, but the habits it created lingered. She still measured her reactions, still paused before responding, still chose restraint even when it was no longer required. Because after carrying something carefully for that long, letting go doesn't happen all at once. What surprised her most was not relief, but awareness. The silence had sharpened everything. She could no longer pretend uncertainty was the reason for waiting. The truth was clearer now, and clarity carries responsibility. Once you know what something means to you, you can't unknow it. Kim Yoo-jung had always been good at playing roles, but this was different. This was a role she had written for herself, and now she had to decide whether to keep performing it or finally step out of it. People around her noticed subtle changes, not enough to point to, not enough to accuse, but enough to feel. She listened more, spoke less. When she laughed, it came slower, but fuller. The smile was still there, but now it felt grounded, not guarded. Industry insiders began describing her with a new word, settled. Not in the sense of slowing down, but in the sense of knowing. There were moments when the temptation to finally explain everything crept in, when a single sentence could have cleared months of speculation. But Kim Yoo-jung understood something most people didn't. Revealing the truth doesn't automatically set it free. Sometimes, it traps it in expectations. She had spent 100 days protecting something fragile. She wasn't about to rush its exposure just because the countdown had ended. Because while the agreement was over, the world hadn't changed. And timing still mattered. The distance between them softened first. Not dramatically, not publicly, just enough to feel human again. Conversations lasted longer. Silences became easier. There was no need to avoid anymore, but also no need to rush forward. They had learned what waiting could teach. And Kim Yoo-jung realized something quietly powerful. The lie hadn't weakened what they shared. It had tested it. If anything, it had stripped away illusion. There were no fantasies left, no impulsive hopes. What remained was steady, unromantic, and real. The kind of connection that survives pressure because it was built under it. Fans continued to speculate, of course. They always would. Every glance was analyzed. Every schedule scrutinized. But Kim Yoo-jung no longer felt the same tension reading those comments. She had lived through the worst part already, the part where she had to deny herself, not the public. That experience changed how she saw everything else. She became more selective, more intentional. Projects were chosen not for momentum, but for meaning. Appearances were fewer, but more deliberate. She wasn't retreating. She was curating her life. And behind that familiar smile was no longer a hidden countdown. There was choice. Choice to speak or stay silent, to reveal or protect, to move forward without apology. Some fans wondered if the story would ever be confirmed, if there would be a moment when everything was finally said out loud. Kim Yoo-jung didn't know the answer to that, and for the first time, she was okay with not knowing. because the truth had already done what it needed to do. It had shaped her. 100 Days of Lies had taught her patience, had shown her the difference between secrecy and privacy, had reminded her that not every meaningful chapter needs an audience to be real. And if the world never heard the full story, that was fine. She had lived it. Behind Kim Yoo-jung's smile was no longer a truth waiting to be revealed. It was a truth she carried with quiet confidence, no longer hidden, no longer heavy, simply hers. And sometimes, that is the most honest ending of all.